The first thing you should do with an actor is not sign a contract with him or something like that. Is to take him to dinner and take him for a walk afterwards and speak to him and meet his wife or his girlfriend or whoever he just dropped or whoever he just took on. See his children. Listen to him. Find out about him. See what he is as a human being. That's your material. His experience is your material. Now, that's strictly Stanislavski, group theater, and so forth, but it's also me. I believe in that. And when you know what an actor has, you can reach in and arouse it, right? You got it? But if you don't know what he has, you don't know what the hell goes on. And you say, well, do this, sit here, don't smoke your cigarette there, light it here, look out the window there, and all that. That's all baloney, you know. The important thing is to get him going and seeing what he does and what you do in respect to what he does. Do you follow me?
I did a play called All My Sons, was directed by Kazan, written by Arthur Miller, and the play ran for quite a while. Somewhere in the middle of it, Kazan gave me a play to read. He said, I want you to read this. I went home, and as I read it, I came somewhere in the middle, 3/4 of the play, and I guess I was crying. And my wife, who was ironing, said, what are you crying about? I said, you read it and see how you feel. And I finished. I gave her the script. She read it, and I was doing the ironing. And she started to cry. And I think we both agreed it was the best written play I have ever read in my life. Poetically, the way the words were put together. It was real, and yet it was poetic. Just beautifully done. And it's Tennessee Williams' Streetcar Named Desire. And when I saw Kazan, I said, I read the play. I said, it's a good play. He said, you liked it, huh? Yeah, I said, yeah, I liked it. And I said to him, I'd better be in it too. He says, it's okay, it'll be okay. I said, no, okay, I gotta be in this play. And it was. I was in the play, Mitch. And in the theater, this play ran for 2 years.
Well, Tennessee Williams had been around for a long time. It wasn't like he just suddenly appeared on the scene and wrote Streetcar Named Desire and everybody said, hey, this guy's great. He had been a long time as an apprentice and, writing one-act plays and so forth. He even worked at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer at one time in the 40s as a scriptwriter. Didn't do very well. And he'd even been a waiter in the French Quarter in New Orleans. And he had, he'd been around, but he had not been a success in any way, shape, or form until about 1945, I believe it was, with The Glass Menagerie, which did very well. So he wrote Streetcar, and he recalled his times back in New Orleans when he was working there. And he lived on Royal Street, and he lived upstairs, and there were 2 streetcars that went their way along Royal, and one was called Desire, and the other was called Cemeteries. And this somehow struck him as a kind of a keynote and a rather sardonic one in some ways. And this was put in the back of his mind. A lot of things were always taken out of the back of his mind. And even his relationship at home, with his mother and his aunt, who turned out to be one of the inspirations for Blanche, but it was just the way she talked and the way she phrased things and her background and so forth. And, of course, himself. There's a great deal of Blanche in Tennessee Williams, believe it or not, and he admits that. So it's a fusion of various things. And, of course, it developed from some one-act plays that he had done earlier, much earlier.
He had a devoted agent named Audrey Wood, who was his mentor and guide and house mother and den mother and everything else for most of his career. I mean, she's quite a wonderful woman, actually. And she had given it, of all people, Streetcar to Irene Selznick, who was the daughter of Louis B. Mayer and ex-wife of David O. Selznick. And she was very much an amateur when it came to play production. She'd only done one play, which I think at that point had closed out of town. But Audrey saw something in Irene, a sort of ferocity, I think, that would stand the play in good stead. And she was looking for a director, and Kazan was hot. He was just coming off of All My Sons. Arthur Miller played, had been a huge hit, and he'd had other successes too. But he was also at that point, quite a successful movie director. So he was a logical choice for this thing. And then his wife, Molly Kazan, had been a great supporter of Tennessee Williams from before World War II. So the first person in the Kazan household to read Streetcar was Molly, and she loved it and handed it to her husband. And he had a couple, maybe 24 hours of, I don't know, it's a little off my line, which it was, before he, committed to doing the play. The largest problem with the play was casting. Jessica Tandy, who played Blanche first on Broadway, her husband, Hume Cronin, was a friend of Kazan's, and he arranged a little production out here of an early version of Streetcar. I think it was just a one-act play, but it had a lot of the themes and maybe some of the characters, and invited Kazan to it, and Kazan saw her and said, okay, that's Blanche.
Marlon called her the mother hen. She made sure that we weren't playing around. She was a professional. She came from London. She knew all about the theater. And we were American actors who were in a hit play and feeling our oats and having a good time. And every once in a while she'd come to me or to Marlon and say, that's enough. Play the play. Never mind. And he'd come up to the dressing room and he'd look at me and says, the mother hen is at it again. So she was a mother hen, and thank God for her. This beautiful woman. She was the whip. She held it together.
Hey, Stella!
Stella was also a problem. They didn't have a Stella. And somehow Selznick recalled Kim Hunter from, I think, one of her husband's movies.
Irene Selznick had been aware of me when I was under contract to David and read in the paper that I was back east doing summer stock. I was playing Claudia and doing a kind of tour of it. And she said to herself, I'd heard later, oh, she said, the girl's in theater. Or maybe she's really a good actress. Let's find out. And so she sent her assistant to see me in Claudia, except that he thought I was playing in Stamford, Connecticut, and I was playing in Stamford, New York. So by the time he got to me, the performance was over, but I hadn't yet left the theater. So he came in and talked to me, and he said, Irene has sent me here to talk to you about this character, Stella, but I can't show you a script. I can't even ask you to come in and read for it yet because we haven't cast Blanche yet, and we must have the older sister cast before we decide who should be the younger sister. He said, I guess all I can say to you is, before you decide to do anything else, give us a ring. Well, I didn't have to worry about that. Apparently, when I was playing Claudia out in Detroit, I got a wire from them, would I come in and audition for it? And came in and auditioned for it. I read for Kazan and Williams and Irene. And about an hour later, they called and said, okay. And that was my Broadway debut.
The largest issue was, of course, Stanley. It was supposed to have been, oddly enough, John Garfield, but he made a lot of demands. He wouldn't sign a run-of-the-play contract. He wanted to be able to get out to go do movies after 4 or 5 or 6 months. And so that broke down the negotiation with him. And at some point, Kazan remembered Brando.
Kazan saw him in a play called Truckline Cafe. I was in the play also. He was in the third act, and I was in the first and second act, just small parts. I played a drunken sailor, and Marlon played a ex-GI who came home and found out that his wife had been sleeping around with other men while he was fighting. And he comes in, and he takes the wife on a walk to the pier, and then comes back in 15 minutes, and he's all wet. And he starts to discuss a speech that lasted maybe 4 or 5 minutes, what happened. And when it was over and he got up to leave, that audience clapped, stamped their feet, they whistled, they just went hysterical. I never saw anything like that. You couldn't start the play for a minute and a half, and that's a long time when you're on the stage and there's nothing going on, you can't start. Well, Kazan saw that, and he knew he had something inside.
He studied with Stella Adler, and she was a very good teacher. He learned a lot from her. He hung around the actor studio. He was in my class at the actor studio, and I got to know him. And when the time came and the actors that Irene Selznick would have hoped for, like Garfield and Burt Lancaster, were not available or were not ready, I suggested Marlon.
And he was funny about it. He said it was very difficult to find Brando, physically find him in those days in New York. You know, he had no fixed residence. You know, he'd sleep on people's couches or some girl's house or whatever.
You never know where the hell he was going to sleep. You don't know whom he was with. You don't know whom he was running away from. You don't know whom he was angry about. You never knew. Every day there was a drama that he brought on the set with him.
But he finally tracked him down, and he said, no, look, you got to go talk to Tennessee. He's got to see you. Williams and his friend were at Cape Cod. So he gave him some money, and Kazan always said that he thought that Brando took the money he gave him for food and thumbed his way to the Cape because he arrived like 2 days late. And the Williams household was in chaos, you know. The electricity was on the fritz, the plumbing wasn't working. And Brando, I mean, he comes in and he fixes everything. You know, he fixes the electricity, he fixes the plumbing. And absolutely, of course, charmed Tennessee. So that was the casting.
The thing that also helped a lot in that production was that Tennessee had a crush on Brando. I'm not talking about sex now. I'm talking about person to person. He thought Brando was terrific, and he was very happy, and he supported me in it. But in black moments and dark moments, he'd say, he's great, don't worry about him, he's great.
When we went into rehearsal, the first thing Kazan said, you've all read the play, and I want you to know there are going to be no changes. This is it. This is the play. So we get to work on it right away. And it's true. There was no big, massive changes. Maybe a word here, a line there, something to get a person in or out. But that was it.
The problem early in rehearsals was Brando just mumbled. I mean, he's one of those actors who early in rehearsals just doesn't take the part. He's just toying with it in his mind, and he's going to moan, and nobody could hear him and all that stuff. Everybody was worried about it. But then he started to come up, and then he began to dominate Blanche and throw the balance of the play off in a certain sense. And it very much worried Kazan, and he said, what am I supposed to do? Say to the guy, be less good?
I said to Tennessee, I said, this thing is becoming the Marlon Brando show. I said, everybody who's come to see the rehearsals, say, who is that? And I said, your play's not about Marlon Brando or that character, Stanley. It's about this woman who's somehow a reflection of your own self. I always felt that play had an autobiographical element. And I said, it's about you, the play. And he said, that's a lot of bull. He said, baloney. He said, but don't worry about it. He said, Jess will come up. And Jess did come up. And by the time we opened, it was all right. That problem didn't exist.
But it was a challenge because Jessica was trained in the British theater where you are used to the other actor accepting, coming on cue, or maybe waiting a little bit, and you get used to that, and that's the rhythm of the scene. There's no rhythm with Marlon. You had to be right there every minute, and Jessica wasn't used to it. But like a wonderful human being that she is, she put up with it. It was difficult, very difficult for her.
I think Williams had the notion that this was not just a play for that season, that this was a play that was going to go on as it has forever. Like Chekhov. You know, we've never yet seen anybody's definitive production of any of the great Chekhov plays. It's each new generation comes to them and does them in different ways. I mean, and the play is roomy enough for all kinds of interpretations as the years go on. And I think Williams understood that. He said, so, okay, so this will be Marlon's show, but, you know, in another time, another place, it'll be her show. And I think he had that confidence in what he'd done. And finally, you know, Kazan accepted that.
Kazan directs to the human being. He knew it's the actor who makes the scene come alive. It's his job to find out what's the scene about, where are you coming from, what do you want, and how are you going to get it. Those are kind of fundamental things that you can always rely on if you can't find anything else. And as a director, that's what he looks for. He said, what's the scene about? How can I help the scene? If a scene had to be a warm, hot love scene, and yet they couldn't touch each other, he had it done in front of a burning fireplace. The imagination, that's Kazan. He helps in that way. And when you say, well, what did he teach you? The fundamentals, how to work on the part. Kazan always felt that most actors get a part, and they read this and say, oh, I'm going to do this here, I'm going to cry, and then the third act, I'll be joyous, it's over, and I'll do this, I'll do that, and I'll do that, all up here on branches. But where's the trunk of the tree holding it up? Where's that trunk that holds it all together? Get that trunk. That's what you have to work for. And they used to call it the spine of the character. That's Kazan's analysis of how to work on a part. You know, I worked with Hitchcock also, and he was so technically pure that if it didn't work, he could do it with the camera. He knew just how to cut it and where to put it, and he did it that way. There was no problem with Hitch. With Kazan, sometimes there would be a problem. If two people are doing a scene and it's just not strong enough, it's there, but it's just a scene, he'll go to one person to say, hey, listen, he thinks he's taking the scene from you, and he's bragging about it and everything. And the other fellow says, be careful, he's mad at you. He thinks, you know, he gives you something to, when you play the scene, your mind is already be given that instinct to say, I'm going to watch.
He was an extraordinary director to work with. He would get to know all the actors that he worked with very, very personally, and get to know you much about your life, much about your feelings about things, so that when he wanted any of those internal beauties from you, he knew which button to turn and to push to get it out of you, but would do it very privately, not in front of the whole company. It was always just between you. And he had an incredible capacity to get the very best out of every actor that he ever worked with, I think. I haven't talked to anyone who's ever worked with Kazan that would deny that.
When the play came on, you know, you would think, since this was such a legendary performance, that Brando would have dominated the reviews, but he didn't. It's a very odd thing. If you read the reviews, the next morning reviews of that play, or even the Sunday pieces that came later, it's all pretty much about Jessica Tandy, who was the big Broadway star. Brando had done 2 or 3 items on Broadway, and he was regarded as a comer. But his reviews were kind of like 2 lines, kind of like Marlon Brando takes his part very well. The buzz came out of the opening night because Selznick had a great address book, and she had that theater packed with every one of her friends from the theater, from movies, from all over show business. And they're the ones who responded to what Brando was doing, this legendary and actually, you know, just actually unprecedented performance. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. You know, the brutality of it, and yet the sort of strange inwardness of it. The whole incredible range of what Brando did in that part was clear to the show folks in the audience. It wasn't so clear to the critics. And so the legend of that performance came out of the audience in general, not from the critics specifically.
This play ran with Marlon, Jessica, Kim Hunter for 2 years. And then they brought the Chicago company in, and they ran for another 3 or 4 months. But I must admit, it's a hard thing to be in a play for 2 years and come stimulated every day. It's tough. 8:30 curtain, I'd be at the theater 8 o'clock. You know, to throw off all the other stuff in my life that's going on. But it took longer and longer and longer. And I'd have to come to the theater at 7:30, 7:15. Marlon used to come in, you know, 8:30, 8:15, come, let's go. And I said, okay. But he used to do things from boredom. There's a scene at the end of the play where we're gone for 15, 20 minutes. And he brought in this set of boxing gloves. And in the basement, he said, come on, let's go downstairs. I said, what are you going to do? Let's box, just shadow box. I did it twice. I said, I'm finished. I don't want to do this. And Nick Dennis, who was a boxer, he wouldn't touch it. He said, no, I'm not going to touch it. finally he got a hold of a young stagehand. And he said, come on. So the kid put on gloves, and the boy just went boom, right in his nose. Boom! He had to come upstairs. The props gave him a towel, and he played the whole ending of the play with a towel on his head here. Blood coming all over the place. And as Jessica walked by to go off, she looked at me and said, you stupid ass, you. Off. But that's the kind of thing we're on.
In the meantime, of course, it had gotten the Pulitzer Prize and the New York Critics Award and all kinds of plaudits and what have you. So this was not only a commercial success, but it was a critical success. I mean, you had everything. You had it all.
For me, personally, I enjoyed playing Mitch so much because I loved the play so much. And it was a challenge in a way because I was always playing rough kind of guys in the theater. And this was a complete reversal of what I've been doing. And Marlon, I made a friendship with Marlon and Jessica and Hume Cronin. Friends were made. Kim Hunter, whenever she came out here to do a film, we'd always see her and have dinner with her. And you could tell that what friendship was because they'd always call you, I'm coming out in about a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a film. I said, we'll make a date. Okay, we'll make a date.
The first time people saw the play, it had the effect of the first time you see something that's out of the blue. They hadn't really seen Brando before, and they'd never seen Williams like this. Williams had a tender, sort of nostalgic memory piece, but all of a sudden they saw the great strength, dramatic strength that was in him, and it overwhelmed people in the theater.